Hi, welcome to the channel. My name is Brandon, and for the last 20 years, I've served in vocational ministry, with the last 9 being full time as a prison chaplain. If I were to go back today and do it all over again, here are 3 things I would do differently. The first thing I would do is I would clarify my calling. When I went to Bible college, I had a pretty clear understanding of what I felt God was calling me to do. I got the degree, I jumped straight into church, and I started serving in that capacity. But it wasn't long that I started serving in the church that I started to get bogged down by different responsibilities that would pull me away from what I felt I was called to do. And that's not necessarily the fault of the church. Most of the time, that's imposed by ourselves because we see a need out there, we see a responsibility that needs to be met, and rather than delegating that, which is a big problem that I've had over the years, I would absorb that and I would try to get it done on my own. And so without long time at all, you start to just kind of get bogged down by different responsibilities rather than doing what you were called and made to do. And so this is a very clear distinction in scriptures. We see this all over the place, but the top 2 areas that I can think of come from, first, the Apostle Paul, the second in the book of Acts. And so what happens with Paul is he clarifies his calling in many different passages, but pretty distinctively in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 17. You see, the context here is that there is arguments, there's quarreling, as Paul writes, amongst the church. He's getting word from people in there that everyone's starting to get divided and they're starting to have a leadership struggle with who they're following. He says, some of you say you follow Apollos, some of you say you follow Cephas, who is Peter, and some say they follow Christ. And then he goes and he makes a very sharp statement. He says, is Christ divided? The answer is no. And then he goes on in verse 17, and here's what he says. He says, for Christ did not send me to baptize, but to preach the gospel, and not with words of eloquent wisdom, lest the cross of Christ be emptied of its power. And so Paul gives a very clear distinction of what he's made to do. He goes, I thank God that I didn't baptize any of you, because I never want you to go out into the workplace, into your family lunches, or wherever you're going to say, well, this is what Paul says, this is what Paul told me to do, rather than moving your responsibilities from Christ and putting it on him. So he goes, I thank God that I didn't do any of that I didn't baptize any of you, but my calling is to come and preach the gospel. The second place we see this pretty distinctively comes from Acts chapter 6. Now this is where we start seeing the delegation of the church and different responsibilities rise. You see, in Acts chapter 6, we see these Hellenistic Jews, and these are basically Jewish people who speak Greek, but they're widows. And so they're being overlooked when the passing of the food and all the distribution starts to take place. And the apostles are seeing this and they go, we have to do something about this. And this is the first time where they start delegating deacons. These are people that have high qualities about them. They've got high character and all this stuff. They follow Jesus. They are in tune with the scriptures, and they start delegating these responsibilities to go out and serve and take care of that. And what this tells us is that there are sharp distinctions between spiritual needs of the church, which is the responsibility of your elders, your pastors, your people like that, and administrative needs of the church. And if we aren't careful, sometimes we blur those lines and we end up getting bogged down by the things that are distracting us from what we're called to do. So the first thing that I would do is I would clarify my calling. The second thing I would do differently is I would incorporate apologetics into every facet of the church, whether it's preaching from the pulpit, studying it in small groups, and even incorporating it into our youth curriculum. And the reason why is this. Not long ago, in fact, it was just a few years, where there was a hashtag on Twitter at the time called ex-evangelicals, where people would share their stories of why they are walking away from the church and leaving the faith altogether. And then they would hashtag left the church, ex-evangelical, whatever it may be. And they did it for various reasons, but one of the top, as I dove in to research this, one of the top reasons why people were leaving the church is because they felt that the church would inadequately answer their hard questions about life, about God, about the universe, about purpose. All of these things are big questions, and I'm guessing you've probably asked them too. And so because the church failed to adequately answer this, they started to walk away, wondering if this was all just a big facade. Another reason why I think apologetics is so big and why it needs to be incorporated is because we had forgotten, or maybe never learned, how to talk to people who differed in their worldview. This is what I mean. It's easy for us to come together every Sunday morning or whatever night you do church with your church. It's easy to gather together to study the scriptures and to talk about Jesus because we're all like-minded people. But what I've noticed over the years, especially working in prison ministry as a chaplain, is that we don't know how to talk to people of different faiths, different backgrounds, different worldviews. What happens when you're having a conversation with somebody who has a different faith than you? See, in the prison, there are 41 religions that funnel through my office that the state that I work for recognizes. And so it's hard for all of these inmates to kind of incorporate their faith and talk about it with people because they aren't quite sure if this person that's celled with them, if this person across the hall from them is going to have the same faith or the same worldview. And so my job as a chaplain isn't necessarily to teach them about Jesus, because in some ways that could be illegal for me. My job, though, is to turn these Christian inmates into apologists that travel the decks and they know how to adequately answer these questions. Now, here's the grace, is that you don't have to know all the answers to life's hardest question. But as Peter says in 1 Peter 3:15, you should at least be willing to give it a defense for the reason why you believe. And so that is apologetics in a nutshell, is why do you believe what you believe about Jesus? What's your worldview about life? What do you think about purpose? What did God tell you and show you to do? How did the universe come to exist? Now, these are really big questions, but if you think about it, I'm guessing that you may have a response to those questions. It may not be the most appropriate academic response, but at least it's a defense for why you believe that God is the creator of the universe, that everything started with Adam and Eve, that Jesus was the son of Mary and he was born through immaculate conception. Like, all of these things are answers that you probably have. Maybe you're just afraid to share them. And so that's why I feel that apologetics would be a major focus of mine if I were to start ministry all over again. The third thing I would do differently if I were to go all the way back and do it all over again is I would emphasize the conversation on spiritual warfare. You see, over my 20-year career, I've noticed that Christians within the church have a very skewed definition of what spiritual warfare is. Very few of them even believe in the reality that there is spiritual warfare. But C.S. Lewis says it this way. He says there are two equal problems with defining spiritual warfare. Either on this side, you were overly infatuated with it, which means you're going and you're turning over every rock looking for a demon just to have some sort of spook and have all that fun, or you don't believe in it. In fact, Dr. Strange in the Avengers movie, he says this about the multiverse. He says, we know very little about the multiverse. And I would say that's true about spiritual warfare too. The Bible doesn't really define it in the way that we would hope so. It's kind of vague in certain areas and specific in others. And so we kind of just forget to think and talk about this. But Revelation 12 highlights very clearly what spiritual warfare is. And I think this needs to be abundantly talked about within the church. We need to help Christians understand what the fight is, how to fight back, and where to go from here. But if you look at Revelation 12, the very last verse tells you exactly what's going on here. So let me summarize the chapter and give you some context here. Revelation chapter 12 is the big battle that's taking place in heaven, where Lucifer, who is known to be Satan by the apostles, he's up there and he becomes the sin just overtakes him, and God decides he needs to throw him from heaven, and he's getting thrown down to earth. So Michael, another archangel, is now in the fight, and they have this big battle scene in heaven, and then Satan gets thrown down to earth, and now he's on the hunt. We see this woman who is pregnant. I believe that she is symbolic for Israel, and that's the thing with Revelation, is you don't want to get too tied into the symbolism, albeit important. You want to zoom out a little bit to get the greater context to help you understand what's happening here. And so as this woman is roaming the earth, Satan is trying to go after her as a dragon to destroy her. Well, she gives birth to this boy. I believe that's the Messiah, Jesus. And now he goes and he's doing his thing. So the dragon turns its focus on Jesus, realizes very quickly that he can't get to him. So now he makes a declaration. And this is the very last verse in Revelation chapter 12. This is what it says in verse 17. It says, then the dragon became furious with the woman and went off to make war on the rest of her offspring, on those who keep the commandments of God and to hold the testimony of Jesus. You see, so because Satan couldn't destroy the mission of God through Israel, she gave birth to the boy, couldn't get to him, and now he makes this declaration that if I can't get to you, I'm going to go after the children of God. Who are those? Those are the people who hold to the testimony of Jesus and obey the commandments that have been given to them. This is spiritual warfare. So if you call yourself a Christian and you've made that commitment to follow Jesus, you are in the war. And Satan is going to do everything he can to distract you, to break your confidence, to feel like God has abandoned you, and all of these things. That is part of the war. And I think if I were to go back and do all these things differently, spiritual warfare would be a highlighted conversation that we would implement regularly. I'm curious, with whatever career you're into, if you were to go back in to start at the very beginning, what are some things that you would change too? If you learned something in this video and you want to stay connected for more content, please like and subscribe. We'll see you next time.